Hi everyone, I hope you're doing brilliantly. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about Robert Browning's My Last Duchess, which is a bit of a lengthy one, I'll be honest, but definitely still worth it. Because it's quite an oldie, I'll go through a little translation with you before we crack on with any of the proper analysis. But first, I want to go through a little bit of the context because, as usual, a lot of this is going to inform our understanding of the poem. So, on this title slide here, you can actually see the Duke and Duchess that the poem is thought to be about, and that is Duke Alfonso II and a girl whose name I can't pronounce. It's Italian, Lucrezia di Cosimo Medici or something. And like it says here, officially, they think she died of tuberculosis, but it is pretty widely speculated that actually her husband poisoned her. I think he was obviously a bit of a madman if he did. But anyway, yes, he was searching for another wife who was higher up in status, but to get a divorce, especially as an aristocrat, was quite looked down on, which meant that he would have had to preserve his reputation somehow. And this is why it looks a bit suspicious. Did he kill her to marry a new wife? So, if you're studying this poem, you probably already know by now that it's a dramatic monologue. But what is interesting is that around this time of writing, Robert Browning actually made the dramatic monologue his own. He even had an entire collection called Dramatic Lyrics, which is where poems like My Last Duchess and Porphyria's Lover are collected. Porphyria's Lover is in the Love and Relationships cluster. He actually married the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who is an awesome poet, and one of her poems is in the Love and Relationships cluster as well, but I'm digressing now. So let's get back to it. So these are all interesting things, but they don't necessarily help us to understand the poem. But something that might inform our knowledge of the poem is the fact that Browning was very passionate about the Italian Renaissance. He visited Italy a couple of times during his life, and he actually died there too, but yes, visual art was kind of one of the central parts of the Italian Renaissance, so you can see how this poem was influenced by it. Ferrara is in northern Italy. I don't think I mentioned that already. But let's have a little look at the structure of the poem, because I feel like this is potentially one of the most difficult ones to analyse in terms of structure. It almost feels like there's nothing worth saying with structure. We know that the form is a dramatic monologue, of course, because a dramatic monologue is a poem in which someone is talking, meaning the Duke here, but is addressing an unseen or unheard person. The fact that only the Duke has a voice in this poem is significant without a doubt. Both the person kind of interviewing him, if you like, to be a potential husband, and the Duchess are voiceless. It really does show where the power lies. The Duke is on the upper hand of the power dynamic. It's in iambic pentameter too, which is something, especially in Shakespeare, that is associated with kind of upper class citizens or aristocrats. This definitely suggests a kind of upper class self-importance in the Duke, which is no doubt reflected in his words. He's a bit crazy. Interestingly, I didn't notice this at first somehow, but there are also some quite rigid rhymes in there. They're all rhyming couplets, which kind of mimics the tight control that the Duke has over the Duchess and the situation occurring. It is also ironic because when we think of couplets and like pairs of two, I think of relationships. He can talk in couplets all he likes because he can control that, but he cannot control what the Duchess does and how their relationship works out, unless he kills her, I guess, but you know what I mean. There's also like no end stops at all. Which goes to show the rush of anger that's going on through the Duke right now. He can't get his words out fast enough and he just wants to express all of his emotions at once. He wants everyone to know how he's feeling, what's happening in his life, which of course is the typical narcissist behaviour. The Duke is referred to as a narcissist by many critics, and some even align narcissism with the upper classes. I mean, to be fair, if you spent your whole life being put at the top of everything, you might just be conditioned to think that you're superior to the lower classes. That doesn't excuse it, but it does give a bit more of a sympathetic view towards the Duke if you want to lean in that direction with your analysis. And you know how in language you do focus shifts in the structure question? We can do a similar thing here, but I want to draw your attention to the ending, because at the ending, the focus shifts to something completely different. Well, kind of, because the painting of the Duchess is technically a work of art, yes, but he has used it to tell the story of the actual Duchess. The Duchess is a real person, but by listing things like Notice Neptune and other works of art, the Duke is positioning the Duchess as just a work of art, as though she was never meant to be more than aesthetics, even in her lifetime. This links back to how, in the Victorian era, women were valued based on how aesthetically pleasing they were, and they were more of a pretty commodity than a wife or daughter or anything like that. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Lastly, I want to talk about how this poem is within the genre of ekphrastic poems. What the hell is that? Well, an ekphrastic poem is a poem that focuses on art as its subject. So here we have the portrait of the Duchess as our subject creating the ekphrasis. But all of this barely means anything unless we look at the actual language, the narrative of the Duke and the Duchess's time together. So what actually is the narrative? If you're confused, that's okay, we're going to go through it together. So the Duke is showing a round account because there is potential that he is going to marry his daughter. At least, this is something we can assume. He starts speaking about the Duchess, though, and pulls back a curtain to reveal the portrait of her that a painter called Frau Pandolf painted. He speaks strangely of her and shows frustration at the fact that she was supposedly being unfaithful. He said he is choosy about who gets to look at the portrait, an obvious hint at his obsession with control. He begins to say that she was too easily made happy. She smiled all the time, and God forbid she smiled at anything that wasn't him. The smiles were expected to be reserved for him only, it seems. The painter flattered the Duchess with compliments like paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Some men picked cherries for her, which interfered with their marriage somehow because she thanked them just too much for it to be appropriate. The gift of cherries and the gift of the Duke's marriage were nowhere near the same, so why was she acting like it? He says that he would not go so low as to blame her, but then he does. Then he gave commands, which really does suggest he killed her, and I'm pretty sure Robert Browning actually confirmed this, even though it is slightly ambiguous in the poem. Then he turns his and our attention to the rest of the art in his gallery, and we take no more notice of the Duchess. Okay, so we've got a firm understanding of the poem. We can describe the poem all we like though, but it won't really get us any marks, so we want analysis because analysis is the way to go. It's our AO2. I'm going to take you through a line-by-line analysis. So firstly, here we have in the first line the possessive pronoun my, the key word being possessive. He makes it clear right from the beginning that he sees her as a possession, an object, rather than a human being. Again, this relates straight back to the Victorian attitudes towards women in marriage. We also have the word last, which sets up to acknowledge that there have probably been more than just one wife. Interestingly, he also says that the Duchess is painted on the wall, but she isn't. It's a painted canvas on the wall. If he'd said, that's my last Duchess, painted, comma, on the wall, it might be different, but he hasn't. Immediately, the Duke presents himself as an unreliable narrator. He is failing to tell the real story. Looking as if she were alive is a good line, because how can she look alive if she's unmoving? She might have the healthy qualities of a human, I suppose, because that is how Frau Pandolf painted her, but again, unreliable narrator moment. It also has this tone as if he's fantasizing. Interesting, since he's the one who killed her. Does he only value her when she is finally able to be controlled by him because she is completely unmoving? He calls the piece a wonder now, and that now is really crucial because it shows that he didn't like it before when she was alive. He thought it was awful because it reminded him of his wife and the painter flirting. There she stands reinforces the unreliability. She's not standing at all, she's hanging, literally and figuratively. Hanging around, haunting them. Hanging being associated with death, and hanging may be hinted at in the next couple of lines where he says, dies along her throat. There could be a reason Browning has chosen these words specifically. He veils a command as a question in, wilt please you sit and look at her? This sit contrasts the stand in the previous line. He wants the Count to be below him, literally and figuratively. He almost immediately afterwards positions him as an outsider with the word strangers. All the way through, we are reminded of the power the Duke has, and he is so narcissistic that he will not let us forget it. There is no doubt that this power is also evident in the phrase, none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, because of his controlling who can see her portrait. I think we can also focus on drawn specifically as having a kind of double meaning. We're talking about an art gallery, so it could relate to artistry. I don't know, tentative, but a link nonetheless. And then we talk about the Duchess's spot of joy. Essentially, she is just blushing, but the word spot makes it seem as though it is something more. A spot can connote shame and loss of innocence, or a kind of dirtying of purity, especially in the Victorian era and before. It suggests that it should be marked with a kind of guilt or shame. Women aren't allowed to be joyful or explore sexual freedom. This is the part where we see that quote, "dies along her throat." I do think this might be a hint at how she died. So the fact that he is talking about her heart is ironic. It's almost like she had so much of a heart that it compensated for his heartlessness. The fact that he struggles to express his frustration with the phrase, "how should I say," evident with the dashes in the middle of the line, shows just how heartless he is. He is getting angry over her enjoyment. Also, the repetition of "to" as a kind of way of measuring how much of something there is suggests that he is placing limits on her happiness and she is not adhering to them. There is no way someone can be happy in a marriage like that. I also think that the word "looks" might have a double meaning. Of course, it literally means that she's looking around everywhere, but could also mean that she, as a good-looking woman, is walking around everywhere and attracting attention. So you've probably heard this one before, but I think one of the reasons that the Duke gets annoyed about the bough of cherries is because cherries can have suggestive connotations, you know. If you've ever heard the phrase "pop your cherry" and know what it means, you will understand. And now look at this huge pink chunk of quote here. That is quite a bit I want to talk about. The repetition of "thanks" is quite good because it shows his frustration at the fact that she was, being polite to others. He's very self-entitled. But if you see here, one of the most noticeable rhymes I think in this poem is "ranked" and "thanked" together. And this draws a connection between the two words. Is it that having a ranking should automatically be thanked? We are kind of invited to see how he sees, to be honest, which is a bit delusional. Then there's "my gift," which is that possessive again. He puts himself first. It is all about self-importance. And then he says, "who'd stoop to blame?" But he does. He lowers himself to the level of someone immoral. He's deflecting blame. He also shows his unreliability again when he says he doesn't have a skill in speech in the phrase "which I have not," because he's literally monologuing right now. It's really ironic. And what Browning is showing us here is that power is unreliable. So lessened here also has a bit of a double meaning. He's all about wordplay, I think. It's very clever. So it can mean lessened as in with an E, so as in she is becoming less. Obviously it can be lecturing as well. I think that's how it's spelt here. And then we get back to "will please you rise." So the sentences are becoming a bit more clipped again. It is threatening. It's a reminder that he's on top of the power dynamic. It's intended to be polite, perhaps, but it is another command veiled as a question. Therefore, the poem has a bit of a cyclical structure. Another way you can say that poem has a cyclical structure is like this. The focus is at the beginning on art, at the middle on the Duchess, at the end on art again. He labels the fair daughter's self as his object. Literal objectification, signifying that we are moving back into materialism. He says, "notice Neptune taming a seahorse, which Claus of Innsbruck made." Again, there is a focus on the names. Rather than the artwork, we are back to thinking about the art in a similar way to how we thought about Fra Pandolf. I think by ending the poem this way, we are alerted to the fact that to the Duke, the Duchess was just a piece of art in a series. The series of art is a metaphor for the series of wives. Art is aesthetic-based, just like upper-class marriages to women, as well as status, which is shown in the obsession with names. I'm going to leave you with a little quote from Clyde Rials, maybe Rials, I'm not sure, which looks into the Duke's character. It says that he tells all, which suggests that in this moment he is being fully transparent with what he thinks is the truth. But that doesn't mean that he's being a reliable narrator. He is just trying to justify himself and make himself appear a bit more moral. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have anything else you want to add to our analysis of the poem, then of course please do it, because literature has no right answer and it is all about interpretation. Thank you. I'll see you next time.